July 14, 2026. Somewhere along the eastern edge of the Strait of Hormuz, a formation of vessels altered course. No announcement preceded the maneuver. No press release followed it. The ships moved, and within 48 hours, a decision was made inside the West Wing that would redirect the entire trajectory of American military posture in the Persian Gulf. And the part of this story that mainstream coverage has almost entirely buried is this. What Iran did was not a provocation in the conventional sense. It was the deliberate activation of a second theater, a strategic move designed not to win a confrontation, but to force Washington to divide its attention, its assets, and its resolve across two simultaneous crises at once. But let's back all the way up. For the better part of 18 months, the operating assumption inside American defense planning circles was that Iran's most dangerous capability was its ability to threaten closure of the Strait of Hormuz itself, that narrow 21-mile channel through which roughly 20% of the world's oil supply moves every single day. Planners wargamed the scenario endlessly. The carrier strike groups were positioned accordingly. The Fifth Fleet's operational tempo was calibrated around a single choke point, a single axis of threat, a single contingency. That assumption, as of the second week of July 2026, is now operationally obsolete. What Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps naval component did on July 12th was not a move against the Strait, it was a move against the Gulf of Oman, specifically against the approaches to the Arabian Sea that sit outside the traditional zone of American naval concentration. 3 fast attack craft, 2 of them equipped with domestically produced anti-ship missile systems that the IRGS has designated the Nasser series, conducted what Iranian state media described as a routine patrol exercise. It was not routine. The coordinates logged by U.S. naval intelligence placed those vessels within 11 nautical miles of a commercial shipping lane used by liquefied natural gas carriers bound for South Korean and Japanese ports. 11 nautical miles. That is inside effective engagement range for the Nasser 1. That is not a patrol. That is a ranging exercise. The distinction matters enormously, and it is the distinction that most of what you have read this week has completely failed to draw. A patrol is presence. A ranging exercise is targeting data collection. What the IRGS naval component conducted on July 12th was the latter, a live environment calibration of fire control parameters against real commercial traffic, in a zone where American defensive coverage is thinner, response times are longer, and the political optics of any countermove are considerably more complicated. Senior officials inside U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, were briefed on the incident within 6 hours. The assessment that reached the National Security Council by the evening of July 13th described the Gulf of Oman maneuver as a, quote, deliberate geographic displacement of provocation activity. In plain language, Iran moved the game board. Now hold that thought, because what happened next is where this story becomes something different entirely. By the morning of July 14th, President Trump had been briefed. The readout of that briefing, as reconstructed from 3 sources familiar with the conversation, included a specific question from the president directed at the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. What would it take to make Iran understand that this new front would not be treated differently than the old one? The answer that came back was not a list of diplomatic options. It was a targeting matrix. Read that again and hold it. The answer that came back from the nation's senior military officer, in response to a question about deterrence signaling, was a targeting matrix. That is the document that lists potential strike objectives, assigns them priority rankings, and estimates the military effect of each option. The fact that this was the first response, not a sanctions package, not a diplomatic back-channel activation, not a United Nations Security Council referral, tells you something fundamental about where American strategic patience stands in the summer of 2026. It stands at the edge of its range. The targeting matrix, according to reporting from 2 defense correspondents whose sources have been reliable on Iran-related intelligence in previous cycles, included 4 categories of objective. The first category was IRGS naval infrastructure along the Gulf of Oman coastline, specifically the fast attack craft maintenance facilities at Jask, a port the IRGS has been quietly expanding since 2023. The second category was the command and control nodes that would direct any anti-ship missile engagement in the Eastern Gulf theater. The third category was Iran's early warning radar installations along the Makran coast, the infrastructure that gives Tehran visibility into naval movements approaching from the Arabian Sea. The fourth category, and the one that caused the most debate inside the Situation Room, was a set of dual-use facilities near Bandar Abbas that Iran uses for both civilian port operations and IRGS logistics. Dual-use targeting is legally and politically complicated. It always is. The reason it was on the matrix at all reflects something about how CENTCOM planners are now framing this conflict, not as a series of discrete provocations to be managed individually, but as a single integrated campaign being prosecuted by Iran against American interests across multiple geographic domains simultaneously. That framing, integrated campaign, is new. Or rather, it is newly acknowledged at the level of formal planning documents. People inside the intelligence community who have been arguing for this framing for the better part of 2 years say that what changed is not Iran's behavior, which has been consistent, but Washington's willingness to name what that behavior actually is. Iran has been running an integrated campaign. It has used the Houthis in Yemen as one vector. It has used Hezbollah's reconstituted logistics networks in Lebanon and Syria as a second vector. It has used Shia militia proxy forces in Iraq as a third vector. And it has used its own IRGS naval component as a fourth vector, until now, concentrated in the Persian Gulf, but as of July 12th, extending into the Gulf of Oman. 4 vectors, 1 campaign, 1 decision-making architecture in Tehran coordinating all of them. The question that Trump's targeting matrix was designed to answer is this: if you want to impose costs on a 4-vector integrated campaign, where do you strike to produce the maximum disruption at the minimum risk of escalation? And the answer that the Joint Chiefs provided, the answer embedded in that matrix, was that you do not strike the vectors themselves. You strike the architecture. The architecture in this context means 3 things. It means the command and control structure that coordinates between the vectors. It means the logistics pipelines that resource each vector independently so that damaging one does not automatically degrade the others. And it means the strategic leadership layer inside the IRGS, specifically the IRGS Quds Force and its relationship to the IRGS Navy, that makes the operational decisions about when to escalate, when to pause, and when to open a new front. Opening a new front is what Iran just did. It did so deliberately, with calculation, and with a specific strategic objective in mind. Now, let's go inside the mechanism, because understanding why Iran opened this front right now is the part of this story that will determine everything that follows. Here is the confirmed operational picture as of mid-July 2026. Iran is under simultaneous economic pressure from 3 directions. The reimposed sanctions architecture, tightened in the spring of 2026 after the collapse of the Vienna-adjacent talks that briefly seemed to be producing progress, has reduced Iran's oil export revenues to approximately 40% of their pre-maximum pressure peak. The rial is trading at rates that are effectively a slow-motion economic emergency for ordinary Iranians. And the internal political situation, the succession dynamics following the death of Supreme Leader Khamenei 18 months ago, and the consolidation of authority under his son Mojtaba, which remains contested inside the system, has created a leadership environment in which demonstrating strength externally is not optional. It is politically existential. When a state is under that combination of pressures, economic attrition, political contestation, external military encirclement, it has a limited set of strategic options. It can capitulate, which no faction inside the current Iranian system can afford to do and survive politically. It can negotiate, which requires a credible offer from the other side and a domestic political environment stable enough to sell a deal, and Iran has neither right now. Or it can escalate in a way that is calibrated to impose costs on its adversaries without triggering the full-scale military response that would end the regime. The Gulf of Oman maneuver is option 3. It is calibrated escalation. It is Iran saying, you thought you knew where the game was being played, you were wrong, and now you have to make a choice about whether to follow us into this new space or accept that we control it. The military track has expanded. In the 48 hours following the July 12th incident, the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, which had been operating in the northern Persian Gulf, received orders to reposition. The repositioning took it south and east, toward the Gulf of Oman, toward the new axis of Iranian activity. Simultaneously, the Air Force's Expeditionary Air Wing at Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE increased its sortie rate. B-52 strategic bombers that have been forward deployed to Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, a deployment that has been ongoing since March, were placed on a higher alert posture. These are not the movements of a military preparing to stand down. The diplomatic track has fractured. The back-channel communication architecture that American and Iranian officials had been using, routed through Omani intermediaries, operating at a very low level of formality but providing a crucial circuit breaker function, has gone dark. The last substantive contact, according to 2 sources familiar with the channel, occurred on July 10th, 2 days before the Gulf of Oman incident. Whatever was communicated in that contact either failed to prevent the provocation or was not intended to. Either interpretation is alarming. The psychological pressure track reached a new peak this week. Trump's public statements in the 36 hours following his briefing were notably different in register from his previous Iran commentary. He did not threaten. He described. He described what American military capability looks like, what it is positioned to do, and what the consequences would be for Iranian infrastructure that he named specifically, not in the careful language of diplomatic signaling, but in the direct language of someone who has seen a targeting matrix and found its contents satisfying. That shift in register, from threat to description, is a specific form of escalatory signaling. It is designed to communicate that the decision calculus has already been completed, that the targeting work is already done, and that what remains is only the question of whether Iran provides the trigger. The honest assessment is this: the situation in the Gulf of Oman and the broader Persian Gulf theater is now more dangerous than it was 2 weeks ago, and it is more dangerous in a way that is structurally different from previous escalation cycles. In previous cycles, 2019's tanker attacks, 2020's post-Soleimani period, the various Houthi-related flare-ups of 2024 and early 2025, there was always a circuit breaker available, a diplomatic channel, a third-party intermediary, a pause imposed by domestic political pressures on one side or the other. What is not clear right now is where that circuit breaker is. What is not clear is whether the back channel through Oman can be reactivated before the next Iranian move. What is not clear is whether the faction inside Tehran that wants to test American resolve further has the political authority to continue acting without constraint. And what is genuinely uncertain, the thing that should keep serious people up at night, is whether the targeting matrix that Trump was shown on the morning of July 14th will remain a planning document or become an execute order. These are the questions that matter. These are the questions that the headlines about Iranian provocations and American warnings are not actually answering. On July 14th, 2026, somewhere along the eastern edge of the Strait of Hormuz, a formation of vessels altered course, and the decision made in response to that course change will define what this region looks like for years to come. The ships moved, Washington answered, and the space between those two facts is where the next war or the next peace will be decided.